Hi, my name is Morgan. I'm obsessed with the Beatles, and today I'm going to tell you a random fun fact about the best band in the world. Today, what we're going to talk about is one of the biggest what-ifs in Beatles history. We're going to talk about Pete Best, because today was the anniversary that the Beatles fired him. So, on August 16th, 1962, something happened that completely changed the Beatles forever. Pete Best was fired. And Ringo Starr became the Beatles' drummer. But here's the crazy part. Pete Best was actually the Beatles' drummer for almost 2 years. He joined the band in 1960, just before they went to Hamburg, Germany, and he played through some of the most important early years of the Beatles. He played in Hamburg, he played at the Cavern Club, he played on the Beatles' early recordings, and he was there when the band was starting to become the biggest group in Liverpool. But then came 1962. In 1962, the Beatles had just gotten the recording contract with EMI Studios and producer George Martin. George Martin wasn't really completely satisfied with Pete Best's drumming, so he suggested that they find a new drummer. And they did. They found the best drummer ever, Ringo Starr, but this is the really sad part. The Beatles didn't fire Pete Best. They made Brian Epstein do it. So on August 16th, 1962, Brian Epstein called Pete into his office and he told him that he was out. And just like that, Ringo Starr was the new Beatles drummer. Ringo played his first show with the Beatles on August 18th, 1962, and we all know what happened after that. Just a few months later, the Beatles were recording Love Me Do and becoming a huge sensation. But there's probably people out there who are really curious as to what happened to Pete. Pete did not become a famous Beatle. After leaving the band, Pete played with several groups, including the Pete Best Combo. But eventually he left the music business altogether. He worked as a civil servant for about 20 years. He raised a family, lived a much quieter life away from the spotlight. Then, decades later, he returned to music and formed the Pete Best Band. Pete Best is still alive today. He was born in 1941 and he's around 84 years old. In 2025, Pete announced his retirement from performing after decades of playing music. But I know that there's probably still some questions about Pete, such as, did he ever sue the Beatles? The answer is sort of. Shortly after he was fired, his solicitor sent a legal document to Brian Epstein threatening legal action over his dismissal. But there was another lawsuit that was a little bit more famous than that one. In 1965, John Lennon and Ringo, they had made some comments in an interview about Pete Best, and they had said that they claimed that Pete had taken pills to make himself ill. Pete sued for defamation. The case was eventually settled out of court in 1969. So yes, Pete Best did legally take on the Beatles. For decades, Pete Best didn't receive any royalties from the recordings he had made because he wasn't a songwriter and wasn't part of the Beatles' later recordings. But in 1995, the Beatles, they released Anthology 1, and Pete Best was on a lot of those recordings. And that finally resulted in a significant payment to Pete Best. I think we can all learn a thing or two from Pete Best. Time heals all wounds. Pete Best is no longer bitter about being let go from the Beatles. So Pete Best no longer looks at the Beatles, he no longer has any sort of bitterness to them. But can you imagine being Pete Best? Like going to Hamburg, playing the Cavern Club, doing all this, being important, and then right when the band makes it big, you're out. And then you have to sit back and you have to watch them become the most influential and the best band in the world without you. That has to be really hard. I think he's a very strong person. That has to suck. I've been a fan of the Beatles since I was younger, before I could walk. And people used to ask me, can you name all 4? And I used to say, I can name all 6. And they used to look at me weird because they didn't know there was actually 6 Beatles. And there is. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Stu Sutcliffe, and Pete Best. And if you really want to get into it, you know, George Martin should really be in there. But I can name all 6 Beatles. And that's the story of Pete Best. That's all I have for you today. So I do want to acknowledge the people who are sending me stars. I really, really appreciate it. I want you to know that everything that I get from these videos is going towards my fund to Liverpool. I'm going to Liverpool in March. I'm taking my husband and my father with me, and I'm going to document the whole entire thing, and I'm counting down the days, and I'm very excited. So every time that somebody sends me stars, that's where that money is going. So thank you. I appreciate it. But I have to end it by asking, do you think the Beatles would have been just as successful with Pete Best behind the drums? I don't. I think Ringo is what was the missing piece, but what do you think? All right, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day. I love you all so much, and thank you again for over 10,000 followers. You have made this the best summer of my life. And don't worry, I'm not done. I'm gonna keep making videos, you know, and teach, and I'm gonna do it. And I love you all, and I do it for you, and I love you. You are the best. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.